Hopefully my dog doesn't start barking during this broadcast.
I like your background. It looks good.
If you see me mute mine, it's because my girls are back here. They're just laying down for right now. So
Perfect.
They are well trained. I know. Trust me. They know better. That's that they know better look.
They be sometimey. They be Zuri is sometimey. Y'all pray my strength with her and pray for my husband because, ooh, Lord.
All right. It looks like we are now live on the Black Business Focus Group page. So I see Stephanie. All right. Good. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phillip Dunn. I am the administrator of the Black Business Focus Group, as well as the CEO of To the Table. And I'm excited to be here with you all again as we take part in our third episode of Voices of the BBFG. And this second episode is dedicated to mental health in the Black community. I'm joined today with very special co-host, Stephanie Lyons, and she is here to help me moderate another panel discussion with our esteemed professionals and our featured guest. Right out of the gate, I want to introduce these folks, and then we're not going to spend a whole lot of time hooplying. But very first specialist we have is Katrina Landry, LPC, licensed professional counselor, Sabastan Moore, licensed professional counselor, and then Andrew Landry, who is an author and also the founder of Where Men Hurt. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get right into our panel discussion.
My name is Katrina Landry. I am the owner of Renewed Hope Counseling Center. I work with adults and couples in the Humble area and provide services via telehealth to anyone in the Texas or Florida areas.
Sabastan Moore, owner, CEO of Project Purpose Concierge Therapy, focusing on the concierge component where we meet clients not only figuratively but literally where they are in the greater Houston, Richmond, Katy area.
I'm Andrew Landry, owner of Where Men Hurt, founder of Where Men Hurt Foundation. I'm an author, public speaker, and glad to be here.
Is Stephanie Lyons.
I'm Stephanie Lyons, mental health advocate, supporter of mental health in the Black community, former business owner of All Student Shuttle, and just glad to be here.
All right, thank you all for those introductions. I want to point out before we get started today, the last time we met and the last time we had this discussion on May 16th, which was about 28 days ago, we had a number of traumatic events that occurred within our community, impacting our community, and it also impacts our mental health as a community. And among those things I'm thinking about are, of course, the George Floyd murder, which is 8 minutes and 46 seconds of 4 police officers, almost in ritual fashion, murdering this young man. We also learned more about the Breonna Taylor case in Tennessee, or excuse me, in Louisville. And so we uncovering more information. We also learned a little bit more information about Ahmaud Arbery in his situation. Also set against the backdrop was we had situations occur with COVID, which is deeply impacting our community, something that's continuing to decimate our community in large numbers. And then against the backdrop of unemployment in our community, where many of us are severely impacted by the devastation that's happening to our economy. So there's quite a bit that's going on. And so I want to start by asking our mental health professionals, how is, and I know that you're close enough to your clients and to the streets, how is the Black community doing during this time?
Well, if I were to I would say that we are a bit on the extreme at this point. We have those folks who are immersed by the experience, who are fighting daily to try to maintain stability and normalcy from an emotional standpoint. And then we have other extremes.
Sebastian, I'm struggling to hear you. You're kind of cutting in and out.
Yeah,
Hear me
it's
now?
doing the same for me as well.
Now
Oh.
I can hear you better now. I'm sorry. Can you
Okay.
start over for me?
Right.
What
Can
did
you start
guys-
over?
Oh, you want me to start all the way over?
Please. Yeah, it started from the beginning.
Well, okay, I will meet you where you are. So I was saying that we basically have two extremes in the community right now, and the summarized version of what I said initially was that first portion of the community is completely immersed. They're completely overwhelmed and under the weight of the emotional trauma that we're dealing with right now, and that's from a professional standpoint, from a personal standpoint, and in some cases even in their relationships. The other end of that extreme are those who are acting oblivious. There's no conversation about it. There's no anger in relation to it. There's no position as far as what they feel needs to occur. They're just living life, going through the motion, and to a degree are in denial about what's happening. So that's been my experience to this point. It's all or nothing with our community.
I think for me, it's probably a little bit more wider gamut, and I have some that are kind of in between. I have some who we've talked about how they've experienced more issues with their coworkers now because of this, and so that's caused some added stress for them, and so they're trying to talk about it. And I think that there's a sense that says, hey, I'm frustrated, but it's like, I don't know where to go beyond that part. So I think that there's that part that we are communicating. And because I work with couples, one of the big things I try to do is how can we be there for each other? How can we as couples be there for our spouses? Understanding both sides, right? As a wife, how fearful sometimes we could feel for our children and our spouse, and then the weight that our spouse carries, right? How can we be that safe space for them? But then also the husband understanding, their, our fears and how they can be there for us with what we're going. So I work with couples about that part. I've actually had a couple of clients, not in the sense of the actual death part, but I've had the part where they have normalized it. They have normalized the way that police are and racism is in their life. And I think before we were on the call before, and I was talking about how my own dad, when I was younger, from a young age, he said, you are Black. And even though I'm biracial, they are going to see you as Black. So you have to be X, Y, and Z. We've taught our family, our children, our culture has been taught that you have to be extra, you have to do more to be at some even close to equal playing level. And I think that has been normalized. And so when we have these things that's happened, it was a young Black man. I mean, he was not even in his early, late 30s. And he said, I'm not shocked. We can feel sad and hurt about what has happened, but the shock for some is just not there anymore. And I think that that's a struggle for us as a culture too. So I think it's just the gamut of parents are now having to have these kind of conversations with their children, and that's been hard. And so I've been talking with adults, with their parents, parenting, and how they're communicating these things to their children, and their conversations with their daughters are different than they're having with their sons, especially when I'm talking to the men who have sons that they're talking to. It's a harder conversation to have. And so I'm glad that they're in here. I'm glad that we're able to have that, they have that space, but we're definitely going to have to talk through this process because it's hitting from a lot of different angles with that.
And I want to try to extract something from your responses. And you said that it's hitting folks hard. We're understanding now we've normalized this whole process of terror that's taking place to our community. And at the same time, there is this thing that's going on where we still kind of hold tight to the notion that if they weren't doing this, or if they weren't doing that, I think I saw a post where it says, Black people are still asking for people to stop killing us. And then there's always this chorus in the background saying, yeah, but. So how do we break away from that normalcy where it's accepted that Black people can most certainly face death, in police encounters or in encounters with others? How do we make that not normal, Katrina?
Well, I think a big part of that is realizing that it's not okay, and taking the not okay and try to make some changes. And so I think if we were to, there's a thing called, we talk about like radical acceptance. And part of the struggle that when we talk about acceptance is saying, we think that acceptance automatically means I agree or I'm okay with it. And if we say, I use this example with Houston, we don't always like the hot weather. We know that it is, right? So then we work in what it is. And so that acceptance part is saying, we know that this is what's going on. So how do we deal with what is going on? How do we promote change? How do we deal with how we're communicating? And I think we talked a little bit before about just how our normal responses have been, and our defense mechanisms of typically responding in an anger way, that we're having to readdress how we communicate. First, I got to know how I'm feeling, how I'm impacted, how I feel about it, more than just saying I'm angry, right? I'm probably sure that I'm more than angry. And so if I can understand me first, then I can start to learn how to manage what I do with how I feel, and how I then interact in what I'm needing for that change to happen.
Right. I think what she's saying is very true. And I think the next step to that, or the addition to that is, once we kind of get a handle on what we're feeling and where we are with that particular situation, that's where the action plan comes into play. What tends to happen, and I think we might have mentioned last time we were together, was that we experienced the outrage. We put up some hashtags. We may even raise a little money, but 2-3 months removed from the event, it falls into another example. And the emotion that was driving us initially, it can't last forever, but the actions that would keep us motivated, those things aren't put into place. So once the emotion dies down, then the advocacy also dies down. And that's the part where we're missing the proverbial boat.
One of the
Andrew, I'm sorry, Stephanie, just one more question for Andrew. So how are the Black men in the community, in your opinion, what would you say our response to all of this is, and then also what it should be?
Well, I think from the men that I'm visiting with, one of the primary things is there's a heightened sense of our awareness. There's a lot of anger and frustration because we don't really know what we can do. You look at an arrest right now or stop. To me, I may be like, well, why are you arresting me? And officer takes that as resisting, right? So it's subjective to what their feelings are about it. So one of the things that we've talked about is how to be militant without being violent. What actions can we take that will promote change without endangering our lives? And I think that's the hard part, because it is subjective to those that are, that are out there that have the power or the ability to stop it with gunfire or with chokeholds or whatever. So, I think that's been the biggest struggle, and trying to re-educate ourselves on our rights, and re-educate ourselves on the things that are available to us. And so that's been kind of the feedback that we've been getting with Where Men Hurt.
I kind of want to what he said, because I think it's the thing that there's a portion of us who have had negative experiences, and so as that we go and we learn what our rights are, and we kind of almost use it as a weapon, so to speak. And then there's another portion of us that do not have those experiences, and that portion of us do not take the time to find out exactly what our rights are, exactly what you can say, exactly what you can do, what you should expect. And I think that might be a part of what we could improve on in our part, is to know what is correct, right? And a lot of times what we say is correct, right, or wrong, that's also coming from a subjective point of view. Now, from a life and what, civil rights standpoint, from what a person deserves, then those things are pretty black and white, I would say. But from a legal standpoint, from interacting with these bodies and these organizations that are, impacting us in such a negative way, we don't often know what the expectation should be from a documented standpoint. And so, and I speak a lot about, how we take emotion. We're running with the emotion, but then when the emotion wears off, then we're tired, right? And that's where the plan falls apart. So what he's saying is, I agree wholeheartedly. When you're militant, that includes knowing what your rights are, knowing what their obligations are, what they're duty bound to do or not to do outside of what we believe to be, from an emotional standpoint, what is right.
One of the things that, all right, I guess I'll just kind of hit on a couple of things here. I know, kind of going back to what you were asking, Katrina, about how do we, and I'm paraphrasing here, kind of keep or not become desensitized to what's going on, as Sabastan said, after the emotion, because we are an emotional people. Our music is emotional, our dance is emotional. And I think that that's probably something that we have to be real about. That can be good and bad. And in this situation, it can be bad because that's where we lose, some of the rhythm, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it, in terms of when things die down. So I agree with you, Sabastan. I know that I have not looked at the entire video of George Floyd. I refuse. The still picture was enough for me. And so I think we have to protect what we see. And because, I think we become desensitized just by looking at everything on the internet. We don't have to look at it. Just like you don't have to listen to a solicitor when they call. What do? You hang up the phone. As soon as you know what it is, you hang up the phone. You're not duty bound to look at everything, hence desensitizing yourself and others to what's going on. Just you become numb to it and you just become accepting. We have to be careful because I think that's kind of a modern day lynching, which is what was done, back in the day. They make an example. You see that example. The seed is already planted. It's set up in your head. And so, you could leave the gate open, but you know that the slaves aren't going anywhere because they already have that set up in their head. Me personally, that's one of the things that I'm doing or choosing not to do. And I'm speaking to my daughters and asking them to not only not do the same, but to talk to their friends. You don't have to look at everything. So that's one to that, just kind of touching on what you were saying beforehand, Phil, with that. The other thing is that, kind of going toward what Andrew was saying, how to embody and empower our men, especially, to know what they can do, and not, I'm concerned about them becoming, being emasculated in terms of they just can't do anything. So just don't do anything at all. I'm just going to fall and just lay here, And I think that we really need to focus on empowering them, because if they do that, then the rest of us will fall. I mean, you guys are the head. And if you feel like you can't do anything, then the women and children, we're really going to feel that way. And our households are dying for lack of leadership in the homes, for lack of men, being able to be fathers. And we just need to really, it just really needs to be a focus to empower our men so that, the entire household will be empowered. And so that's where I think our focus really needs to be.
I appreciate all the dialogue because it points to our community really wanting to see change. We want to see transformation in our community. It'll help us in our households. It'll help us in our businesses, in the community overall. But there is another component to this, and we're not just in this by ourselves. We have our white brothers and sisters who are very much in this situation with us, whether they want to be or not. And so we just recently saw more of an outpouring of support, whether it was in the workplace, whether it was your neighbor stopping by to, have a conversation with you. So we're starting to see more of that support here. However, there are still some that are resistant to change. We saw the NFL, they made their announcement. We're seeing many major corporations making their announcements, but they're not going far enough. What is it in our white brothers and sisters mentality that's either preventing them from changing, causing them to be hesitant or resistant from changing? Help me understand that, Katrina and Sebastian.
I saw her face.
I did too.
Well, I think that's a hard space, right? Because I don't want to feel like I'm speaking for someone. So I guess in that regard, that's a little tricky. If I'm not really in agreement with it, then I may do what I can in order to pacify. And so I think that you can come from two different perspectives. You can come from that. You can come from the part of, hey, I don't want to catch any more backlash. I don't want to lose any more sales. I don't want to have any more issues. So let me say that I'm going to do this. Let me do my due diligence in this part that I can do. And then you may have some that really just say, okay, I get it now. For whatever reason, some light bulb can click and say, change has to happen. And now I'm just unsure of what that looks like for me on my end because I'm looked at as part of the problem, right? Or maybe even I've been part of the issue. So now we have some uncertainties of what this looks like for me and what do I do? So I think we could probably come from two different ways and doesn't necessarily mean that either is all. I don't want to say it's a case by case basis because that just sounds so generic, right? But I think it does have to do with your relationships and how we're going to communicate with one another. And we can determine if we can see that sincerity of really wanting to do something different, or we can kind of sense those, as I like to kind of say, I just don't want to hear your mouth, right? I don't want to just get this over with. Let's just not deal with this. So let me just say I'm sorry so that we can just be done with it. We can have either one of those. But I think sometimes the struggle is that if I don't really agree, and if my agreement says that now I am less than, if I viewed myself at this high regard, and now I put you in the same ballpark as me, then now do I view myself as less than? And if I'm unwilling to do that, I'm going to be much more limited to create or assist in that change.
I think if I were to oversimplify it, I'd say it's the difference between empathy and sympathy. One of them is I feel bad for you. That's sad for you. And another one is I feel what you're feeling. I might not have had the exact same experience, but I can relate to the feeling. So though I might not myself be oppressed, or myself have had these experiences, I know what it feels like to be, downtrodden. I know what it feels like to feel like a target, and it doesn't. And I think that's one of the ways that we miss one another is that we're trying to compare, apples to apples, and you don't have any apples. But right. For you to say, hey, I might not know your exact struggle, but I can relate to how you feel from that standpoint. And I didn't like the feeling. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to do my part to help you not feel that. So that's the start of it. But when you're talking about the powers that be or the decision makers, you know, that to get over that hump, what we're asking would be likened to suggesting that I've been wrong all this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like to say that, you know, my policies in place, my affirmative action and my hiring practices and, you know, and me having feel over for dinner, you know, and all those things that I'm doing, it wasn't good enough, right? My intentions weren't good enough. I was trying, but you know, that's different because one, you're talking about, I have a genuine relationship with a person and I'm understanding that person's struggle. And then the other one is I want to appear as though I see this person as a person only. So, you know, when we hear phrases like, you know, I don't see color, you know, that's one of those phrases where maybe someone's saying it and in their heart, they're trying to say, I see you as a person and I don't judge you by your skin color. But then I you know, I remind those folks, you know, that is a part of who that person is.
Yep.
You know, that shapes their experience. That it shapes their expectations in life. That shapes how they see the world and how the world sees them. So you cannot say, I don't see color because you don't see me then.
Right.
And I'm not all a color, but that's definitely a big part of who I am. And so to deny those little things, to deny that you see color, or to suggest that, you know, these things that I've done to, you know, define or create equity, that they weren't done from a true and sincere place, but they were done from a business, what's best for business standpoint, then now you're dangerously close to changing the status quo and the expectations. And who wants to change the status quo when you're winning?
Right. Right.
But you know, when
Exactly.
we talk about the colorblind part, is it because if we were to view color, now all of a sudden color is what makes inferiority, right? Like I think if we were to say, you know, Phil, you don't have any hair, Sebastian, you do. If I don't acknowledge that, right? I mean, if we don't acknowledge that, does that then now all of a sudden make us equal? And I think that's the struggle when we talk about like this colorblind part, is that we acknowledging who someone is, female, male, black or light skin or no, you know, whatever those, if we acknowledge that, it doesn't automatically mean an inferiority. And I think that's where the big struggle comes from when we talk about this lack of color, is that I don't care that you see that I'm a black female. That doesn't change superiority, and acknowledge all of who I am as opposed to a piece of me. And you not acknowledging, or you trying to say, oh no, well, we're just going to blanket statement and don't see any of that. That doesn't change inferiority part. Like that's where I think we struggle with. We see color now all of a sudden being more of a dominant race, and that's not what it's supposed to be. But if we see that as that, that's why we want to throw in color doesn't matter. It does, but it doesn't mean that it changes equality.
Right.
So then does that make racism more of a white issue? Because if we're not seeing it like that, we being Black and brown people, you know, and it's, I mean, if it's more or less, like you were saying, Katrina, how they see it in terms of equality, and automatically, if you see that I'm a Black woman, then that lowers my standard, then does that problem not become the problem of the beholder? Does that make sense?
Well, but if we were to be honest, we do that within our own culture.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
So I think if we were to be honest, who was, I mean, we have that within our own culture. So I think we have allowed systemically overall, it has been, you know, let's go all the way back, you know, it was whites were superior, and which is, this is probably going to sound probably not that nice, but you know, we had one that were in the house and one that was in the field.
Right.
So as when I was coming up, it was, well, you know, you was in the house because I was light skinned and you were out. So we have if we were to look at culturally, it's all across the board. It's within our own culture and it's outside of our culture. So we're going to have to realize that at the end of the day, none of that makes anybody better or inferior. It means that we're just different. I think that's the struggle. We have to understand that different doesn't change equality. Different means we're just different.
Right. Well, and a lot of times too, and I heard this and it's so true, proximity will often determine your perception. So, you know, depending on, you know, like Sebastian was saying, you know, well, you have, you know, and I've heard white people say it too, you know, oh, well, I have friends that are Black. My antenna goes up and I'm like, you know, you have one or two, but does that really give you any kind of, like you were saying, the empathy versus sympathy, you know, issue? And I think that, you know, going back to what Phil was saying, is that I think it's harder for white people because no one, I mean, and I guess I kind of heard this, and this may sound bad as well, like you were saying, Katrina, but, you know, if you were to ask a white person, okay, well then trade places with me, kind of like the Freaky Friday thing, you know, if we could trade places, you know, for a day. I really don't think that they would want to trade places with a minority. Well, why don't you? I mean, I think if you can kind of address that question and ask them that, then that's the beginning of the start of a conversation for you to understand what it feels like to be me, to have the empathy. If you can kind of take a look and honestly answer that question, well, I don't want to be like you because, you know, I know you guys are treated badly. You know, I hear what my parents are saying behind closed doors, you know. Well, now maybe that's the beginning, like I said, of the start of a conversation to try to create some empathy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it brings up the next question for Andrew, and that is, you know, man to man, brother to brother. You know, we want to solve this problem of race. And I think one of the ways we could do that is to directly address our white brothers. Man to man, what do you say to a white brother to get him to understand that we have a problem and that we need to solve it? And that, you know, if a Black man hurts, all men should be in the struggle together to solve this issue. What do you say?
I don't think saying anything unsolicited works. I don't think that I can go to a white brother and say, hey, there's a problem if he hasn't said that there's a problem. I think it becomes recognition on his part. So in this scenario over the last 30 days, you know, I've had a friend of mine that I went to school with who was a white cop, and he said, hey, what can I do? It is the recognition on his part that gives me the freedom to express to him. So I could not, now there's another white cop that I couldn't call right now and say, hey, this is a problem and this is how you can fix it, because they don't see it as a problem. So I think and one of the things that we've been dealing with in the group is self-accountability, right? So for why it applies to me also, it applies to my white brothers also. And I think the problem is once they connect themselves to a part of the problem, now that accountability part says, hey, well, I may be racist also. And the denial, because they do have Black friends, and they do, you know, they did play sports with Black guys, and Black guys came over and ate lunch with them and all of that. But when they look at it as a whole, if their mentality is not of, hey, my brother's hurting and I need to reach out and see what's going on, I don't think there's a conversation that's going to be effective until they become connected to the issue. And I think it's going to have to be more on their end than it is ours. Not saying that we don't try, you know, but it is until they decide that they want to be a part of the solution, they'll remain a part of the problem.
Very well.
And I think what we're saying, yeah, I agree. And I think what we're saying is that when that person is willing to accept that, you know, that there is a problem, their ears are open and they hear what you have to say differently than if they don't. And I think, you know, that's why what he's saying is so true, because if I don't think there's a problem and you telling me all the reasons why it's a problem, I'm like, okay, yeah, but like you were saying earlier, yeah, but this, but yeah, but did you see how I did that? Did
Black
you know
on black crime, right?
Right. So, you know, when you do that, then I can justify, explain any point that you offer me because I'm not really looking at it from the standpoint of there needs to be a solution. I'm looking at it trying to prove that the solution is already in place.
Well, I think that a big struggle that we have to have in all of this is humility, right? I got to be able to hear some hard conversations of, yes, this happened and it hurt somebody and I was part of that. I got to be able to hear that without defending, right? I got to be able to hear, you stepped on my toe and it hurt my foot and I'm upset with you. No, I didn't. Or you own it. Own your stuff. Own that maybe you didn't make some reform where you could have, or maybe you didn't step in where you should have. Own that part. And even if it's not you individually, self, right? If you own as a culture that you are a part of, that has happened, then I think it goes back to, there has to be that humility to be able to see that and own that part. If we're unwilling to do that, it's going to go right back to, what they were saying. I'm going to be defensive. My response is going to be more about trying to justify what I did do well, as opposed to really just saying, we just got to do better and do something different. And I want to be part of it, as opposed to saying, no, it's not even wanting to see it for the reality of it.
Right.
And if I can jump in real quick, one of the things that like Katrina was saying, is that when we get defensive also, because when they say, look at all the looting and rioting, it's categorized as Black people, even though most of them are not Black. And so now we're justifying and saying, hey, but it's only a few bad apples or whatever that is. So we find ourselves in the same position of trying to be able to hear from their point of view, because they see it as, hey, the rioters and the looters, it's all because of the movement, as opposed to it being specifically designed for whoever's doing the bad stuff. And so I think we have to be mindful of that when we're hearing from our counterparts also.
One of the things that I wanted to say is that on the heels of that is that when the looting becomes more important than the death of a person, or the death of persons, multiple persons, to me, that's another justification, another reason to say, this is why we don't support you guys. This is why. So the shoes being stolen at Target is more important than this man being murdered in broad daylight. It's just another way to deflect, another way to provide some justification for what it is you already don't want to do. Let's just be honest, okay? And I guess it's important, for our white brothers and sisters to listen to understand and not listen to win. I think that that's something that we can carry in all of our relationships, be it marital, friends, on the job. I just need you to listen to understand, and don't try to win the conversation by, and we're all guilty of doing it. In your head, you kind of hear the person, but you're already setting up, your counter argument. So you're not really listening. Your attention is split. And when we do that, we don't hear each other, we just don't.
This sets up our next question. We're still going to stay on this topic, but this is a business focus group, and I want to make sure that we address some aspects of business. And there's a very important topic that's running along parallel to what's happening in our community with police brutality, and that is reparations. This week, Bob Johnson of BET declared that it is now time for Black America to pursue reparations. And on a talk show on the Breakfast Club, he mentioned that it would require a change in mentality from the Black community. And what are some of the mental roadblocks that are holding us back from all collectively lining up and saying it is our time to pursue reparations? That's a question I'll pose to you all. I'll just kind of let you know that there are some out there in our community that are saying, we don't need reparations. We're not owed reparations. And, we're just going to give it back to our white brothers and sisters anyway. And my immediate response is, you go ahead and you sign your waiver, or give me your allotment and I'll handle it, in the way it should be handled. But there is some mental, drawback or holdback that's holding us back from saying, you know what, our community is owed a debt. We have an outstanding liability that we need to collect on. What are some of those mental things that we need to work on there?
That's a tough one. I think maybe the part that you said that stuck out or it stands out to me is the mentality portion. And so maybe not to speak specifically to whether or not we're owed reparation, but more to how we would manage should we get that, right? And so I think we've all had conversations or been a part of a conversation where, you know, we were discussing patronizing a Black-owned business. And, you know, when things fall short or they're not up to par, you know, then it's like, that's what you get when you support Black folks. You know, that type of thing, whether it be and so though we may be, you go to an establishment that is not Black-owned and it's, you know, a chain, and you have the same experience, you kind of say that experience, you let that experience be isolated. You know, the server was terrible, or, you know, I had to wait so long to get my food, and you leave it at that. But when it's Black-owned and we know it's Black-owned, you put that little tagline on there, but that's what you get when you do Black, you know, support Black people. You know, when we're doing business with one another, we're seeking discounts, you know, versus understanding that this person is also running a business. This is the reason why you have the Black Business Focus Group, because our tendency is to support what the mainstream dictates to us is the valuable commodity versus determining for ourselves that we're able to provide those commodities for ourselves. So that, along with, you know, from a overarching standpoint, our consumeristic approach makes it very difficult for us to, if and when we do, to take that and put ourselves in a position as a community that we should be in, right? We have to be more willing to say, hey, I don't have to have the latest and the greatest or the newest, or I don't have to drive across town to get that particular name brand. I don't have to have that particular, you know, tag, you know, for it to be valuable. And sometimes we, from an emotional standpoint and a mental standpoint, we connect our own worth to tangible things. And unfortunately, a lot of those tangible things that we connect our worth to are things that are not supporting our own community.
Yeah,
So,
I think
Sebastian, I wanted to ask you real quick, do you think, on the heels of what you're saying, do you think that that's because some kind of way, like you were saying, our value is definitely tied into labels, it's tied into things, because we have to, as Katrina said, or maybe it was Phil that said earlier, we have to do so much, we have to be so extra, you know, just to even, you know, come up to the same standard. So we're used to having to go overboard. With that being said, is it possible that we don't support our own, or we think less of our own product in some type of way because it's not that big label, or because in some kind of way it's kind of like a person with low self-esteem? You know, we don't think we're worthy. We don't think our products and services are worthy. I mean, is that possible? Does that make sense?
It is possible. And I know that, you know, over the years we've had businesses and artists and labels and those types of things that, you know, were Black owned, you know, at least on the forefront were Black owned. And we were able to support them. But even in those cases, it was mainstream support. So, you know, that grassroots, that, you know, that business that's not popping up on Yelp, right? Mm-hmm. Then we're leery when we know that it's not Yelp, and I can't go research and get the opinions of strangers, ironically, to help me determine whether I want to support this particular business, right? My money is too valuable for me to waste it over here. Versus, you know, hey, I'm going to give it a try, and then I can make a decision about that business at that time. But, you know, again, to go back to what I was saying, instead of it being that business at that time, it becomes Black people. It becomes Black business. And that's the part that we have to change as far as our mindset. And those little taglines, those are things that are kind of keeping that ball rolling. Like, we have to be more mindful about how we go about, you know, expressing ourselves or our disappointment or our excitement or our needs or our wants, especially when it comes to our own. So, you know, hey, we tried this business, didn't really work out. I'll try somebody else, and leave that, you know, but you know that, you know, that's what we get. You know, leave that little part out of there. Or when you have somebody who's working, you know, this person's trying to start a business and they're doing a service, and BP does the same service, or Shell or Chevron or whomever, they do the same service. You want to go with the name brand that you trust, name recognition, right? Because you feel safe that you're going to get a quality product because you are hearing the name, you heard the name, and so you automatically trust that they're going to do a good job versus doing a character assessment and finding that there are a number of minority-owned businesses that provide all the same services. But to do the research would be a bit much for many of us, you know. And so that's the next step, is, you know, to be willing to do the research. There are people out there who provide quality service, who provide a quality product, who themselves are quality individuals, and it's a pleasure to do business with them. But we have to do the research.
You know, there was a conversation that was on the group a couple of weeks ago, and I think the thread was kind of more of why don't we have a better relationship with Black-owned businesses or something like that. And one of the things, I don't normally do a whole bunch of posting, but the response that I did say was, I'm going to come from two different perspectives. One, from a business owner. You know, as a business owner, it's important that you run your business well, right? And I think that just because we have an idea doesn't mean that we're able to run a business. I mean, let's just be honest. So if we're wanting to have good quality stuff, then have yourself together. Have a good product. Don't outprice yourself in a sense because you feel like because you're Black owned or because you're startup or because you're whatever, that you should have this. Understand the market. Know what's going to cause your prices to be what it is. Don't just come out of just throw out some numbers. So one, from a business side, do your part in being a good Black owned business. And then the part that I said as a person who purchases or patronizes Black owned businesses is that if I've had a bad experience with one, there's another one that does the same thing. Find another one, right? So if I go to this restaurant and I didn't necessarily like the way that they cook these greens, they're not the only Black-owned business that cooks greens in the whole city of Houston, right? So just find another one that's Black-owned business that can do, and you'll find one that works for you. It's kind of like a therapist, right? Find a therapist. If this one doesn't work well for you, keep going. It's not your excuse to say, well, I didn't like this one, so I'm not doing therapy anymore. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like coming from both sides. One, we have to present a good, well done product. And then two, just because we've had a not good experience doesn't mean that we discount all of them. And I think to speak to the mentality part, we also have to determine what we view as wealth. Sometimes we think wealth is having things, right? I have a house, I have a car, I have this kind of whatever these things are, they give us this status. But when we talk about wealth, that's not the same thing. And so we have to change our mentality on what wealth is. Sometimes, not all, but if we were to, again, go back to from the beginning, if we came from nothing or if we didn't have a lot, then our experiences are typically going to be different. If we've been taught something different about what, my parents taught me how to, save your money, do this with your money, do this. And if someone else hasn't, then they're going to say, when I got it, I'm going to do whatever I want with it because I didn't have it. So our experiences, our narratives, again, kind of change how we view those things. And so part of our mentality is understanding that we can't be impulsive with whatever things that we want to do, and that it's going to require some sacrifices on our end to know that, hey, just because it looks like it's something that we want, how is it adding value to our life, not just now, but long term? And when we talk about our children's, what does that look like for us, right? We're talking about generational wealth. We're talking about being able to pass things through family members, right? As opposed to, how do we establish businesses so that, if I die, someone else can take over, even if they don't want to, they can sell it and then they have money, right? So it's still being able to say, how are we, what do we even consider to be wealth, and adjust that thought process there too.
Now I want to ask you, I want to stay on this because it appears as though we've adopted, the European model of what value and wealth is. And so we strive and we spend the extra money on the brands, on the labels, et cetera. You know, it should Black America break away from that addiction, that consumer addiction of, you know, these brands that don't necessarily reinvest back into our community? Is that something that we can realistically do?
But I don't know that most, if you were to look at most wealthy white people, they're not into that. Right? That's not what they don't look like that, right? Because they realize, even though it's their product that they're selling, they realize it's not going to add value to their life. So they're not, if you're looking at most, if we're talking about outside of, you know, going to business meetings and things like that, they're usually investing in things that are going to add value. So when we're talking about that part, that's different. Wealth, we're looking at a culturalistic side that says, if you have these brands, it says you are wealthy, right? That's different than saying, how do I build wealth? Those two aren't necessarily having and building wealth and looking like wealth aren't the same.
So Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, they're not trying to get the handbags, the belts, the new J's, but they're invested in those products, and they know that we're addicted to that consumerism. It benefit from, you know, stock price appreciation and dividends, but they themselves they don't share in that addiction.
Warren Buffett still lives in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska.
Exactly. And that's the point that I wanted to bring up. You know, a lot of times, you know, if God says the same, when I become the millionaire that I want to be, I will be the millionaire next door. I will drive a modest car. I don't need a big house for somebody else, for me to pay for someone else to come and clean. You know, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It will give me more freedoms to have more experiences in life and to be able to help those that I want to help, to like you said, to increase the value to those that are around me and to my family. I think that's the freedom that I'm looking for. I don't have to play it by someone else's rules, but I think we're feeding the monster. So we're kind of like creating our own detriment and our own destruction, because we have been taught and continue to be taught that you need these labels to be valued, you know, to be accepted. You're good enough, you know, and once you have this, well, like you said, it's not really adding any value. Now I have something else I need to dust. You know, I'm constantly chasing my tail because I have to have the newest update, the newest car, the newest thing. And I'm just feeding the wealth, the generational wealth of, you know, another culture. And I kind of feel like we're the butt of the joke, if that makes sense. We're the butt of the joke, and we don't even get that we're the joke, you know? And I think that that's where Black businesses come into play, you know, where we can respect Black businesses. When you go to a Black business, don't look for a hookup. Stop looking for the hookup. You know, there's enough at the table for everyone to eat. But I think you have to be able to, you know, afford for people to get to the table. And if you look at it, if I have to give you a hookup right off of the bat, I'm already losing. You know, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And the other thing is that the BBFG, a platform like the BBFG, gives us the ability, like what Sabastan was saying, to be able to feel comfortable with those Black businesses, to get that feedback, to ask, what do you think? You know, and so I think, again, that's where platforms like this are invaluable, so that we can feel comfortable. Hence, we start buying more Black, and we increase our wealth and decrease the wealth of others.
We're not asking Nike for hookups. You go to the store, you buy the price, and you call it a day.
And that's it.
We're not asking Nike to come to our community, build right in this particular area. We go to where it is that we find value. And I think that conversation came from, why don't we have like more therapists in the Black community? And one, they are there. We just, again, like Sabastan said, you gotta look like this. Sometimes we're so lazy. We're like, we just want this big sign that says, go here, right? But it's, if you want something bad enough, if I want to go to a Nike store or the Target, or even to go to Walmart, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna look for one that's close by wherever it is that I'm trying to, if I want it. And I think that sometimes our struggle is that we just want stuff to be given to us. Tell me where this is at. Make it convenient for me. But for therapy, and for me, you're going to have to work. Like, this is going to be, you coming to therapy just coming up is not going to be enough. When you're going to have a commitment to want to work
Right.
through some changes.
Exactly.
And sometimes making it where it's not so accessible or easy for you shows that you're going to be more committed. And so sometimes we're going to have to look for stuff. We're going to have to pay full price for stuff instead of looking for, always feeling like, because they're not this big brand, that now we can always do this negotiating. A business is a business, and realize that if you want something of value, I was always taught quality over quantity is much more important. And you get what you pay for. So if you're going to spend, typically, if you're going to spend good money, it's going to usually be a good quality, because good quality doesn't go on sale.
Right. And I think, to bring it back to your original question, Phil, is like in relation to reparations, I think what we're kind of discussing, or what has become important to us, is us being prepared for it. Right.
Exactly.
So are we due? Should there be something to create the equity gap, to fill that, to close that equity gap? And yeah, absolutely. I think the bigger concern for us as a community is that we have to be prepared to elevate ourselves once that does happen. And to be honest, we have to be willing to make that happen with or without reparations. And so then reparations becomes the icing on the cake, and it, finishes the closing of the gap, versus it being a temporary solution to an issue that's plaguing us within. And I think, that might be more important to a degree than the when or if.
So Phil, if I can jump in and ask a quick question, kind of on the heels of what Sebastian was saying. So then what should the priority of money be in the Black community? Kind of on the heels of what you were saying about reparations. I think reparations can come in different forms. Me personally, it may be wrong for me to say this, but I think if they wrote us all a $350 or $350 million check to each person, I think it would just be destructive because we're not as well versed in terms of the mentality and how we think of money, kind of in what we're talking about. We're not ready for it. It's kind of like people that win the lottery and then, 2 years later, they're broke, So with that being said, I'm thinking that reparations can come in different forms. For instance, I saw an article, Ice Cube said, we shouldn't have to pay taxes. We've already paid. Maybe that's a form of reparation. Maybe it's a form of reparation to offer, free tuition, to public, colleges, maybe to offer it in different ways. And you have the option. Say again?
Pay them student loans.
Yes. And that's a good one. So maybe create a think tank to where we can have it. And if you don't, like Phil was saying, if you don't want yours, then I'll take yours. I'll take advantage of all of those opportunities because they do it in the Asian community. They do it in the Asian community all the time to help them get ahead. So with that being said, what if we had those reparations that came about, what do we do then? How do we build the wealth in our communities in terms of what should the priority be in Black America to help keep us ahead? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and appreciate the question. And that's actually a question for another show, but I'd like to give you just a quick response to that. And my short response is, let me find out. Let me find out what I'm going to do with my $350,000, if that's the amount. Trust that Black people are going to do something that's right and good with their ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears that generated this amount of money. If I know that my great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, were whipped, were raped, they boarded ships to get here, and, I'm not going to squander that legacy. I'm not going to do that. And I think a vast majority of Black people aren't going to do that. This reparations comes with an understanding that there's blood, sweat, and tears tied to that. And that's how I honestly see it. So any form of reparation obviously should come with, some financial education, some options, some counseling, some therapy. We got to remember, just in 5 days in Juneteenth, we all got, what I like to call the massive layoff, which was, the Emancipation Proclamation. And none of us got any offboarding services, right? None of our ancestors received any counseling. You know, we didn't have EAP available. They just got turned out to the wind. And a lot of that mental anguish that was associated with slavery, generation after generation that was compiled and built up in those folks, landed in us. It landed in us. And I think that there's something to be said about that. We have generational trauma that has been compounded, you know, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. And there has to be something to correct it. And I'm so glad to see, you know, Confederate monuments and symbols being taken down all over the United States. And, you know, to tie it all back together, you know, give me a chance to see what I'm going to do with what my ancestors did for this country. And I'll do the best I can for it, because I want to uphold their dreams, their hopes, and all their aspirations. So I'll ask that you guys respond to that same question, but just keep in mind we have 10 more minutes before we shut down, and then also kind of give us your final parting messages, and even some action items that folks can take. Obviously, I want folks to go and experience the services of Katrina and Sabastan, experience the fellowship that Andrew has every Monday. But, you know, give us some final parting thoughts that we can walk away with on this Good Sunday before Juneteenth.
Oh, before Juneteenth. That's heavy, heavier than we might realize. I think that's the message within itself, you know, that we're able to have these type of conversations approaching Juneteenth. You know, that says a lot. And I think from our standpoint, we talk a lot about community, but obviously that community is made of individuals. And so what is the action item that I need to, I myself, we have to ask ourselves, I myself, what am I to do to add, versus allowing or waiting or saying, what don't we do, or what haven't we done, or why can't we have? I, as you hear people say quite often, I become the change I want to see. So then I myself, I go find Black businesses to support, right? I myself, I do the research and find out what the laws are, what's expected of those people in charge, quote unquote, in charge. I find out what my rights are, and I don't leave it to someone else to do. And in educating myself, then we can use another famous tagline, each one reach one. Share that information with someone. And then you, the person who's been shared, you now take it a step further. So yes, we should come together as a community, large bodies, but I think we have to definitely start with the individual self. We have to work on us as an individual, doing the small things to get the information that is readily available, to change our ideas, to change our outlook, to change our perspective, and to empower us to better communicate our perspective to those who don't share it.
One of the things, Phil, I guess that I wanted to, you've actually pulled up here some slides that we've created for all of our members. One of the things that we can do that we've all been saying is to vote. And so you see here that there is a slide that has a link for everyone to go and register, find out your status, and you can find out who's on the ballot. So you can do your own investigation as to what they stand for, you know, the promises that they're making to the community and such. The next thing that we can do to empower ourselves is to complete the census. And I think we need to do so even more so now, because there's been so much destruction within our communities. We're already underfunded, and it's already hard to get money and resources in our communities, but we need to do so even more now more than ever. So that's something else that we can do. If we don't, you got another 10 years. And a lot can happen in 10 years. There are also some links there for some legitimate petitions. I know that there are a lot of different petitions going around and everybody feels like they want to do something, but you want to put your efforts and your focus into things that are legitimate so that we don't waste our energies. And Phil, if you can go to the next slide, the third slide there. There are also some links that I believe Katrina gave us in the last session for locating therapists of color. There are some resources and some education that's there. There's also a link Taraji P. Henson has been a huge advocate for mental health, and her advocacy is also working on free mental health education and the advancement of Black therapists there at that particular link as well. And if you can go to the fourth link, Phil, or the fourth slide, there are some further resources there. And the very last one, I think is a fifth slide. I just kind of added this. I know that we're still in the era of COVID-19, but if I just kind of added it, I thought it would be nice to also support one of the only, well, I'll say one, the only Black-owned 5-diamond luxury resort hotel. And so I believe this is in Grenada. So if we're thinking of supporting Black businesses, trying to get away once COVID is over, you know, and being in a place where we're accepted, you know, and Black is beautiful, this would be an excellent suggestion or an excellent place to consider.
Mr. Landry, I'm gonna need us to go there. We need a schedule so we can. But on the real note, I think coming from to kind of add what Sebastian is saying about being informed, I also want to really talk about how to do this self-care part, because I think as we are experiencing these things and as things continue to happen, we are going to have to be careful about our self-care and what we talk about these gates, these eye, ear, and mouth gates. Know enough to be informed, but know enough when to disconnect so that we're not so overwhelmed without going to too much. You know, if I'm an F, I'm a big F. And so I'm a feeler. So that means I experience the world through feelings. And so when we have, you know, life can be tough because we'll absorb a lot of those kinds of things. And so for people who may not know that they're Fs, we can, if you can think about how normally we say, well, I feel like this should happen, or you know, when this happened, I just felt like this wasn't right. And when we're absorbing the world through feelings, thinkers can do it too, right? But if we're absorbing the world through feelings, I just want us to be really careful that we're going to have to take some time for ourselves to kind of regroup and replenish, because this is a lot. It's overwhelming. And whether we're experiencing ourselves, whether we're fearful for other people, whether it's just absorbing and hearing those things, take some time, listen to things that sometimes my husband will be like, you know, well, what do you want to watch? I was like, something funny. I want something funny. I don't want that's going to have my heart racing. Some of these things, it's finding stuff that's going to help you to relax, because the fatigue is real. And I don't want us to respond out of the fatigue or stop responding because of the fatigue, right? So being mindful that, yes, all of those things are important. Gather information. We do need to vote. And I think a big struggle with this is we can be educated, and it's not my calling, but for somebody, you be the person that we can vote for. Right? We kind of forget that component, you know, let's show up and vote, but we also want some people that we can vote for. And so let's have some people that can come in here that can evoke change that we can vote for. And at the same time, just really being mindful of sometimes we're going to have to take a break from social media and those dialogues that we have back and forth, or sometimes not having the news on 24/7. Where it's it can be all day, all the time, right? We want to be informed. Don't stick your head in the sand. So I'm not saying that. I am saying is just being careful to not overload ourselves, because guys, we are already dealing with a lot of stuff. And so if we can continue to bombard ourselves, we don't take the time to kind of rebuild ourselves up. And so I just want us to be really careful about that part too. And so I'm going to be, you're going to catch me with some masks. I'm going somewhere on somebody's island as soon as I can.
Get ready, Mr. Andrew. Get ready.
Always ready. Well, just a few things that I'm going to say is, one, I think one of the primary things that we have to do is we got to find a way find a way to bridge the educational lapse. There are some things that we're not educated enough about that is stopping us from progressing. One of the things that we talked about in the group is that there's no unified voice for us. You know, back in the 60s, they had Dr. King or they had Malcolm, and we don't have that voice today that the Black people in general will listen to. One of the things that I said, and it sounds bad, but it's true, is many times we don't know what we want. We're waiting for somebody to tell us what we want. And if we don't have that unified voice that can tell us what it is and what direction that we should be going, then we're all over the place, whether we're Republican or Democrat, whether we're Black or white, whatever those differences are, we become split. And so until we get a unified voice and we really get the educational piece to tie it all together, then we're gonna find ourselves in the same circle. You know, we talk all the time about, you know, supporting Black-owned businesses, and yeah, that sounds good, but what happens when there's not that? What happens when I don't have that ability to support that, or there's not even a product that I need for that? And so it is educating us on the things, teaching us the ways, and then we have to address our mental health. You know, that's one of the other things that's really been a disconnect for especially the men. It is having a place where we can address these issues, talk about them, and get to a better place psychologically.
Which is on the other hand, if you can kind of give a little look to maybe where men hurt, and you know that you guys actually offer that kind of forum for men to be able to come together and be like one mind and one body, so that they have some kind of direction. Can you just kind of tell people a little bit more about that, where they can find you when you have meetings, where you're located?
Okay. So Where Men Hurt is right now we're just meeting on Zoom. So usually on my Facebook page, which is Where Men Hurt, you'll just like the page, and we give updates daily on our next meeting. So we usually meet on Monday nights from 6:45 to 8:15. And it's a platform for men to really to be able to just express the struggles of life that they're dealing with. You know, the goal in the group is to build relationships, because self-accountability and relationships are going to be the two things that help us to get to a place of being whole and healed. So if I can build a relationship, there's some things that Phil can tell me that, because we're in a relationship, that somebody off the street can't tell me. And so if we can build those relationships, now I trust Phil to be able to come to Phil and say, hey, Phil, you know, I ain't really like the way my wife told me to sweep the kitchen, and I decided I wasn't going to do it. And Phil can come back and say, but Drew, you know better. And so it is building those relationships that allows us to be able to get the trust so that we can now feel comfortable to reach out to Sabastan when we really need to talk in a more intimate, detailed conversation, as opposed to just a general conversation. And so the goal is to kind of build that relationship so that we can start taking those next steps.
And one other quick question because of that, how can women support, I guess this is a specific question, how can women of color support our men of color? You guys are going through a lot. What can we do? Is there something, because men are from Mars and women are from Venus, our languages are totally different. So I may be thinking that I'm supporting you and I'm saying something nice, and it may go in one ear and come out of the other. So what is the language that we need to be speaking right now to you guys? What are some of the things that we can say or do to help you so that you know that it's a safe place? And you know, you go out there, but when you come in here, baby, it's all good. This is your kingdom.
I think the biggest thing is our issues, our concerns, our thought processes have to be met with non-judgment. That's the first thing. Once we find that there's judgment, then it becomes a total shut off for us. So if I tell my wife, I don't like cleaning the bathtub, and she look at me or look her face kind of like, why would you say that? Then I'm never bringing that to her again. And so I think a lot of time when you look at relationally, the disconnect is because we have felt that you rejected what I had brought to you. And since you rejected it, then I know that I don't like rejection, so I'm not bringing it to you again. And so then you have a communication gap. And so it's just kind of the crazy cycle, I think is what Dr. Emerson Edwards called it. You get in this crazy cycle of lack of communicating, because when I brought you something last time, you gave me an issue about it, or you looked at me funny. And so now I just won't bring you anything. I'm guilty.
I think I would just say, for the ladies, is to understand that first, when you're choosing of those who pursue you, choose a man of vision. And for me, in my opinion, if you choose someone with vision, that makes a lot of it easier, because now when he brings something to you, as Andrew was saying, right, now my conversation is this in line with the vision? And if I'm talking about the vision and how I can support the vision, then that's a very different conversation from, why you doing that? Why would you do that? Right? Because I understand the vision. And so now all those actions that otherwise might not seem reasonable, logical, or make any sense, they make great sense under the umbrella of it being a part of the vision.
Wow. Spot on both of those responses. I was watching Oprah interview First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, the other night on Becoming. And there was a portion where she talked about waking up in the middle of the night and finding President Barack Obama sitting in a chair next to the bed, and he had his head up staring at the ceiling. And like all women do when they catch us in those moments, she asked, what are you thinking about? And he let out a sigh, and then he said, income inequality. And, that was something that, President Barack Obama, we all, kind of know and love, and we saw his vision for America. And I think that she supported that immediately. She knew that, this dude with this crazy sounding name is going to go and run for president. And she even thought, hey, we're going to lose, but I'm going to support him. And I think it was that unwavering support that gave him the confidence, really, in my opinion. I don't care what polls say. When you have a woman that supports you 110%, if you say you're going to do something, and, I don't care if it's building a ladder to the moon, you will build that ladder to the moon if she supports you. And so I think what we need to hear from our women, our sisters, our coworkers, our colleagues, is that we can do it, whatever that vision is, especially if it's something that's to help out our community. If it's something to help out our family. If you believe in us, we can get it done. And especially when we vocalize what those visions and dreams are. And we saw witness to that in someone who, had a father from Kenya, a mother from Kansas, who, had a funny sounding name, started out in Chicago, rose all the way up to the highest office in the land. That's the importance of the power of a woman's support and being in our corner. So that's what I think we need to hear.
Thank you, guys. We need to know that. We need to hear it more often. We really do.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of this show. This was a good show, a good part two, and Stephanie and I are working to try to come up with more of a series on mental health. We have a ton of ideas. We have some amazing panelists that we like to draw upon from time to time. We're actually going to look to draw upon their leadership even more in the future. So we thank you all for listening. I'm going to ask our panelists to hold on here for a couple of more minutes so that we can kind of debrief amongst each other. But to our audience, we thank you for coming to another edition of Voices of the BBFG. Thank you so much.
And Phil, will you also post those slides so that they can have those? And
yes, so we'll post the resources. We'll post information on how to reach Katrina, Sebastian, and Andrew. And we'll have all that information within the event and also closely associated with the video, which will also be posted on YouTube as well. Thank you, Steph.